The War Drum is a unit I've been hearing some noise about recently, and I've got this replay from In-Cars here, where he's going to be facing it with the Tomb Kings. I've got some thoughts about it, and about this build in this game, and just lots of things in general, but let's talk about a little bit about the War Drum here, as we're going to pause. Nice cannon volleys opening up from Cathay here. But what does it give you? Well, extra reload skill, immune to psychology, and melee attack, more importantly. Well, immune to psychology also very important, especially for kind of lower tier units. But that melee attack in particular, look at those Jade Halberds with their harmony active, and with everything kind of stacked on top of each other up to, what is that, 36 melee attack, 44 melee defense, 80 armor, and very good leadership with immunity to psychology. It makes them very tough, and will definitely help Cathay and infantry, which are already generally very cost effective, trade even better. That's kind of the main sort of thrust of the War Drum, right? Yeah, also has these other abilities that it can activate here. This Bastion of the Great Cities, and then I think, was it the ROR has like an extra one? Anyway, it itself is unbreakable. Support unit, big chariot here, doesn't really have a lot of combat stats, but can definitely mass block. Let's take a look at the rest of the build here. We've got some shotguns, Iron Hail Gunners, 3 Grand Cannons, and some Peasant Long Spears. Yeah, the Halberds up front, mixed with some Jade Swords as well. Lore of Yin, Shungen flying around there, looking to maybe summon some Ancestral Warriors, spam that Storm of Shadows. Jade Lancers for the Tomb Kings here, those Skeleton Chariots getting absolutely pummeled by cannons. Neherkara Horsemen here, kind of getting out ahead of their infantry a little bit. We've got some Skeleton Warriors and Spears. Sphinx of Usek and Cetra the Imperishable on his very buff kitty. The War Sphinx, very strong right now. We've got some Necropolis Knights as well. And In-Cars definitely feeling the pressure of those cannons. Again, kind of getting a little bit far forward here and away from support. He is able to kind of get the carrions in here to disrupt momentarily. But these mobile units are landing a lot sooner than he wants them to, where the infantry is kind of far behind here. That is going to lead to them being relatively ineffective at actually disrupting this backline position. And as a result, a lot of these missile units are going to stay online. Another thing to consider, too, of course, is anything the drum is in range, which does have a pretty sizable range on its different effects here. Yeah, 50-meter radius for that Icon of the Great Cities, for example. So, like, this Grand Cannon's not in the area of effect. This Grand Cannon is, though, and 72 leadership on an artillery crew means they could potentially be very tough to break. But a nice Skull Storm there from In-Cars as he rushes in with Cetra and the Necropolis Knights and whatnot. Going to get a nice kind of break here on this Cathayan defensive formation. Start to filter in with the Skeletons and whatnot. Skeletons really aren't going to do anything here except just lose, which is why it's a little bit painful. This matchup for the Tomb Kings has some things going for it, and we'll talk more about that probably towards the end. But yeah, from an infantry standpoint, Cathay infantry are already just straight up better, and the War Drum stacks that even more in their favor. Definitely very tough. I will say the Ancestral Warrior summon here will do quite a bit of damage to the Sphinx of Usek, but also, yeah, they're going to take the magic damage from it. But the shotgun's up close, and the Storm of Shadows debuffing his speed. The Sphinx is definitely getting focused down pretty hard. Cathay probably would have benefited from focus firing as much as possible in the early phase, the Grand Cannons on Cetra, and I do feel that target priority kind of got lost a little bit as they were, you know, pummeling different units, crushing those chariots and other kind of targets as they were approaching. Cetra didn't take too many shots, and that Storm of Shadows plus the flaming cannon damage. Keep in mind, Cetra is weak to fire damage, right? Even on his powerful mount here, that extra 15% definitely hurts when it's coming from a unit like the Grand Cannons of Cathay. Very solid armor-piercing damage. But, yeah, Cetra going to continue to reap some value here with that Skull Storm, doing some really nice AoE damage, trying to swing this infantry fight. He's definitely got numbers on his side, In-Cars does, but, yeah, a little bit overblobbed in a couple positions there, and then largely, again, just Skeleton Warriors extremely ineffective against these Jade Warriors, especially with the War Drum. But even without the War Drum, it's going to be a hopeless engagement. It's a tricky thing here, for sure. Trying to figure out how to win the infantry fight, potentially, as the Tomb Kings, or at least deal with the very cost-effective Cathayan infantry. Certainly the AoE damage seems to be what Inkars was perhaps relying on, but with the Sphinx of Usek falling relatively easily, there's nothing really to challenge the War Drum, and like the disruption, again, because of the loss of some of those early mobility units, maybe if he had saved those until a later stage, perhaps just, you know, kind of hide them in these woods nearby so they're still usable. Don't forget about them, as I probably would. But anyway, yeah, just being able to take out some of these weakened Iron Hails and just try and finish them off because they have that extra bit of leadership, right, from the Harmony and from the War Drum, potentially, especially in this position. It's very tough to actually break the Iron Hails, and they ended up being extremely effective gutting down that Sphinx of Usek, which obviously was needed itself to kill the War Drum. And to be honest, it's interesting to pick. Maybe Cars can enlighten us in the comments below his line of thought on the Necro Sphinx, like sort of what the intention is for that to kill, right? Like in terms of big single entities here, I don't think Cathay is super likely to even try something like, I don't know, maybe you might see one of the dragon siblings, or, you know, I don't think you would see a construct, honestly. The Sentinels are not great. So maybe it is actually brought specifically to kill the War Drum, but in that case, I think, again, just that disruption, even if the horsemen and whatnot, you know, the mobile units for the Tomb Kings are able to get in and disrupt Iron Hails, even if they don't kill them, as long as they can tie them down long enough that perhaps the Sphinx of Usek could actually kill the War Drum. The problem, of course, the War Drum being unbreakable, is that you do actually have to kill it fully to remove its effect, which is certainly easier said than done sometimes, especially, again, maybe get some Yao Ying healing, synergy, kind of Earth Blood in that sort of blob situation. Yeah, definitely can be very, very painful, and right now things are definitely not looking good for Inkars on the balance of power, although Cetra is still alive. He's basically the only thing left at this point. There's really not a lot else. Looks like, yeah, one Spearman was sent into tactical reserve there. So definitely some micro and tactical mistakes from Inkars, but nonetheless, very interesting to see the War Drum in action. And actually, I would say making a difference, perhaps, in helping protect the leadership, especially with some of these missile units as that rush kind of landed there. And again, I don't know, just from a build construction and sort of micro standpoint, that if Inkars, you know, necessarily the War Drum made like that decisive difference and was the reason that he lost, but it was definitely a reason. And the Skullstorm there choosing to go after the Iron Hails just to try and shut them down, protect Cetra. I mean, there's really no good targets at this point. You could go after this kind of central blob here. That's going to leave you open to the Iron Hails. And anyway, the Tomb King's very quickly approaching army losses, so we'll get in close and soak up some cinematics here in Old Lawn as the Cathayans fight the Tomb Kings. Some of you out there will be quite happy with the Cathayan win, and definitely one that showcases sort of how their units can synergize well together in a defensive strategy, and especially in matchups where their infantry, again, already good, the War Drum just makes them great. Extremely, extremely tough to deal with. So, yeah, Inkars ends up basically having Cetra do almost all the heavy lifting. Not really any of his other units are going to come close to paying for themselves. The Sphinx of Usek is definitely an interesting choice. It's less than half the value that it needs here, probably, unfortunately. Again, maybe you take it specifically to try and kill the War Drum, but at the same time, just wasn't able to accomplish that. Some of the rest of these units, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the specific trades here. But just to quickly talk about Olaf's army here as well. Of course, very cost-effective in terms of the infantry. They're all going to pretty much pay for themselves, even despite undead crumbling. And, of course, the reload skill also. I didn't really mention too much, but that was definitely a factor. The War Drum, basically, again, just increasing the DPS, right? Increasing, yeah. Increasing the DPS of all those Iron Hails, which is already pretty good, but definitely makes them even better. Increasing their leadership, so they'll stick around, even as they get wounded. Very good stuff, honestly. So for the mobility perspective for Inkars here, sort of thinking about the Tomb Kings. As much as I want chariots to be good, they just aren't still. As the Tomb King's chariots, at least, in my experience. Maybe some of you guys might have different experience out there, but especially given Cathay's infantry, they have formation attack and sort of a little bit of extra mass often from what the Stone Ground stance or whatever it's called for the Jade Warriors. They're going to struggle to be effective. Likewise, the Neherkar horsemen, I guess they'll out-trade peasant horsemen, but they're going to trade badly into Jade Lancers. So my line of thinking is, why not cheap out and just go with a greater volume so that at least some of your units can land and get that disruption that you need at key moments. Maybe, you know, cut the chariot, take more carrion, even though they don't trade well into Crowman. It's still, again, especially in get certain tournament rule sets, can't take very many Crowmen, right? So you might, let's go to the army build screen here. Might go for more just the cheaper skeleton cavalry, right? Regular skeleton horsemen rather than the Nekara horsemen. And then also getting some carrion here as well. Again, just sort of cheaping out a little bit there. I don't totally hate the pick of the Necropolis Knights, even though they are pretty expensive. But definitely trying to maximize armor-piercing damage like I totally get. I think probably Ushabti, honestly, are maybe the best choice here for armor-piercing in melee in terms of their cost-effectiveness. Obviously, you're going to want to avoid halberds engaging, but if you just kind of cut away at the flanks, try and target like Peasant Long Spears or Jade Swords. The Ushabti do have enough speed that they can kind of act in a flanker role, especially if your opponent is in more stationary kind of defensive role there. Not to mention, you know, if you do choose to downgrade the Necro Sphinx to just a regular War Sphinx, I think it's going to be more cost-effective. And definitely in this matchup, since it seems like that could be a tough one for the Tomb Kings, I think cost efficiency is very key. I don't totally hate the Skull Storm, but I might also see, you know, with some of the gold we've saved, just take Incantation of Protection just in case. Really nice one to have. I don't know if he had it there. I didn't necessarily watch if it was used, but again, could save like either of these single entities if they get caught out and they're going to take a bunch of burst damage from those shotguns. Can definitely help stave off a significant amount of that. Anyway, yeah, to kind of theorycraft things a little bit here, but I would maybe, again, I don't have a ton of recent experience in this matchup, but maybe go with something like this. And while I don't totally hate the skeletons, you are just kind of conceding that you're going to lose the infantry fight by taking them, which doesn't feel great necessarily. But again, if you take some Ushabti to kind of layer behind them in a more mixed composition, something like this, I don't know, again, this is sort of me theory crafting into this a little bit, but the War Sphinx just seems so cost effective and generally better overall than the Sphinx of Usek. Like I said, I'm not likely to see a lot of huge scary targets here, so 2v1 these two could probably take on a dragon sibling, or definitely take on a sentinel or some other big threats if they need to. And then it's the Cameroon War Sphinx going to be much better against infantry and just better overall in terms of animations and stuff. But that's basically it for today. You guys will have to let me know down in the comments below your thoughts about the War Drum. I'm sure it'll come up in more replays soon. But for Cathay, like I said, just basically helps their already cost-effective units be that much more cost-effective. And in some matchups, it makes them almost unbeatable for the enemy in certain circumstances. So there you go. Hopefully enjoyed. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.